Welcome, it's the Matt Sager Podcast, Friday, February 22nd of 2019. And by the way, I talk about this a lot, but I really love appearing on other podcasters' shows and having them appear on my show. It's great because, unlike radio, my fellow hosts are not competition, but rather my community. And to that end, I appear on the latest episode of a great podcast called How Do You Solve a Problem Like Mariah? We had a great time talking about my weird early history with the Red Hot Chili Peppers and lots of other stuff. I'll post a link to the episode in the description for tonight's podcast. In the meantime, let's talk Captain Marvel, shall we? Now, having not seen the movie, the only thing I can comment on is this dumb sideshow that's accompanying its rollout, which is a couple of people have been granted screenings, people in the media, and apparently no one from the media didn't think it was the best movie they ever saw. On the other hand, sites like Rotten Tomatoes, why they don't just have an embargo against reviews until a movie is released is beyond me. But with the movie not having been released, the kind of people that Jussie Smollett was trying to say attacked him, what those people were actually doing while he was ginning up this ridiculous story was convincing themselves that Brie Larson has been making the rounds on media and social media and everywhere she goes, saying, I don't want men, especially white men, to see my movie, which is bizarre. And if she really were saying that, I'm sure someone from Disney would have said, we kind of want to welcome everybody. And when you take out white men, that's going to really affect our box office potential. So maybe stop doing that. But of course, she never said anything like it ever. It's just one of these lies that gets amplified and repeated, and which I suppose contribute to the kind of environment we're living in today, where people are so crazy, so mad about a movie that's not out yet. That's a comic book movie that just happens to star a woman. Holy Christ. That they would believe based on, I don't know, stories told at a bar that somehow spread on 4chan or some shit. I promise you, Brie Larson has never said publicly or privately that she doesn't want white men to see Captain Marvel. But Rotten Tomatoes, foolishly, as do many other sites, allow user reviews of movies that aren't out yet. So she's being review bombed. By she, I mean Brie Larson, but Captain Marvel, the entire film, the entire cast and crew, they're getting review bombed. It's got like a 40% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And in the meantime, it shouldn't be getting positive reviews either, because no user who's making user reviews, regardless of their opinion, has seen the movie. So to even solicit or allow reviews from people who have clearly not seen it, because they can't, is so dumb. It kind of kills the whole idea of internet reviews as being anything remotely like legitimate or trustworthy. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, far from the dark basements of 4chaners and whoever these people are and whatever it is they managed to convince themselves that Brie Larson did, which seriously, she didn't. Please send me a link, send me a video, send me anything other than a quote attributed to her from like Breitbart. Send me something with tangible journalistic bona fides that says Brie Larson has ever said anything like that about any project she's ever done in her life, let alone Captain Marvel. Now, on the other end of the spectrum from these people are the journalists who Disney allows into their screenings. And I'm sorry, because I'm sure Captain Marvel is great. It looks great. I'm really excited to see it. I believe it will be fantastic. It is the beginning of a new age of Marvel movies. And the fact that it's being heralded, led by a woman, just makes it that much cooler, to me anyway. But it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. But everyone who saw it, all these legitimate reviewers, didn't just like it. They didn't just think it was a great movie. They feel their lives have been changed. That something so spectacular played out in that theater. A life-changing movie, basically. And I don't doubt that many people felt that way, but the universal, lockstep, just ass-kissing, slavish devotion to how wonderful it was. I don't know if any action movie is really that transformative. I'm sorry, no offense to Disney or Marvel or any action movie. I love them. I enjoy them a lot. But it is weird that every reviewer had their life changed by this movie. A movie that, this is where I find that corporations make their own murderer. Because in a climate where if you don't lavishly praise, just ridiculously lick the boots of corporate people at Disney, Marvel, wherever, you don't get access to screenings to review, to comics to review before they're released. You are iced out. The only way to deal with media corporations, and this is certainly not limited to anything like Disney or Marvel or comics in general or comic movies. This has been something that people have been working on, particularly in movies, I've noticed, going back to at least 1995 when I was like an editor at this stupid radio station. It's a whole thing. But it was very clear that plans were in the works then, as they had been decades before I was even born, and as are getting really, really effective now in the age of social media and the internet. It's very easy to kill an entire website if they don't give you the reviews you want. And similarly, you know, startup culture is great. There's nothing as awesome as running a website about how great and fun comics are until the comic publishers come out and say, listen, you gave one of our Vertigo books a bad review, so you don't get to review Batman when it comes out next month. You're done. You're off our list. And those are the tactics that they've been allowed to use. and it's poisoned the well, and it's made, again, it's created one of their biggest problems that they face. It is a self-inflicted wound. Because when you don't allow journalists to be journalists, you make it very easy to believe that awful things have been said in the name of your movie. You empower these people as the only alternative to a lockstep, pun not intended, hero worship of every, like if you didn't love Suicide Squad, there's a very decent chance you weren't going to be allowed to review Justice League. And that empowers every bearded, dumb YouTuber or 4chaner or Redditor or whatever, because they have to go now to their own alternate media sphere because they don't think Captain Marvel's that great, for instance. That leads them to an echo chamber that's not unlike the ones you've got at Disney, Fox, Marvel, whatever. They create an alternative ecosphere for themselves, one in which it's a world where Brie Larson's running around doing media tours saying white men are not welcome at her show. And where every reviewer is saying this movie, get ready because your life will be changed. That, too, is going to leave some viewers angry when all they get out of the experience is a really great action movie and don't find their lives are changed forever by the experience. Movies don't work that way. I believe it's going to be great. I certainly don't believe Brie Larson ever said anything about white men. And if she did, I'm positive it was tongue-in-cheek. But it doesn't appear to have ever happened. I don't believe it ever happened. But if they let neutral, like genuine reviewers attend movie screenings anymore, they wouldn't have this problem. Art films, by and large, don't have this problem because they'll take any reviewer they can get. And so, I mean, like there's actual movies out there where it's just people rubbing feces on each other and on the walls. And reviewers go because they're allowed to report honestly on whether they liked it, whether they disliked it, whether there was a little bit too much excrement used in one scene and the other scene had just the right amount of poo for mise en scene. But when you delegitimize a press, you really empower an underground hate group who will then review bomb your movie. And the cycle will repeat again, I'm sure. The one thing about Captain Marvel that is interesting, it's a theory that's been floated today. I first saw it on, I think, Comic Book Resources, but a lot of people are now basically reporting it as fact, which I think is a little bit silly because it's just stuff that's been extrapolated from some business dealings between Disney and Fox and like some momentary flashes of scene that if you like freeze frame every frame of the Captain Marvel trailer, it does make sense. And it would be very true to the comics that when the X-Men are brought in to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is going to happen sometime this year because Disney has acquired Fox, which only makes them that much more powerful in getting to say to potential reviewers, like, listen, we know you're here to review us, but you're here to give us a 5-star review if you ever want to see anything made by Disney, Lucasfilm, Marvel, Fox, anyone. This increasing, it's exciting. I know a lot of people were really excited for Fox and Disney to merge because it meant that, for instance, the X-Men now will be part of the Marvel Universe. But there is a world beyond comic book movies. I don't really like to talk about it much, but it is a world in which Disney now controls, like the economy of Brazil is the kind of money they're playing with. And if you piss one of them off, someone who's big at Fox, once they get acquired by Disney, someone at Lucasfilm gets pissed off of you, your career as a reviewer might as well be over. Something like 60 to maybe as high as 85% of all action, comedy, animated fare are controlled by this one mega conglomerate corporation. But having said that, this is actually pretty cool. And as I said, it's very loyal to the comics. The X-Man Rogue, in one of my favorite comics as a kid, I believe it was Avengers Annual 10. It was either 10, 11, or 9. But Rogue, I believe it was her first appearance. If she'd appeared before, it was only very briefly. And what happened was Captain Marvel turned up in a coma, thrown off a bridge, I think, or maybe through the window of Avengers Mansion. I really should have prepped for tonight's show a little bit better. But the bottom line is Rogue attacked Captain Marvel viciously. Rogue was, before she was an X-Man, a member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. It is, yes, a little bit embarrassing, by the way, be a man in his 40s, knowing all this stuff like verbatim. So I actually feel pretty good about not knowing all the details off the top of my head. Lets you know I've got a life outside this admittedly very colorful fantasy universe. But Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, or Ms. Marvel as she was known, was crippled. I mean, after this happened, it was something like 15 years before she showed up in another Marvel book again at all. And when she did, she had a different name, she had a different set of powers. At one point, she was an alcoholic because she was so traumatized by Rogue's attack. And Rogue, in the meantime, gets all these permanent powers and is also haunted by the memory because she clung too long or something went wrong when she absorbed Captain Marvel's powers. I guess maybe she was trying to murder her. So she got much of her power, many of her memories, and it was terribly traumatic for both of them. And people are now reading a lot into this, and I think they may be right, but it's weird that what started out as someone analyzing the trailer and coming up with some theories about it, the Captain Marvel trailer, is now just being reported as news because the internet is crazy. The stuff gets reported on as fact that is pure speculation. But what people are saying, and what I think would be pretty cool, because it would be very, very true to the comic roots, and it would make both characters interesting, is that when the X-Men come over to the Marvel Universe, when they're no longer made by a separate Fox entity, when they'll be kept far away from Bryan Singer, as will most movies, I think, going forward, that they'll merge with the Avengers, who are now going to be in large part represented, chiefly, perhaps, by Captain Marvel, that they're going to do essentially a recreation of sorts of that Avengers Annual, in which Captain Marvel turned up comatose and Rogue showed up going crazy, eventually defecting from the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. I think because she sought help from Charles Xavier, because she was basically walking around with the ghost of Carol Danvers, who was lying comatose in a hospital somewhere inside her, and it was driving her mental. I think depending on who was writing it and when, some of it was just the guilt and the false memory she got from her, and some of it at varying times was as if Captain Marvel, even as she lay there just like comatose, that her mind or her soul or some combination of the two lived on inside Rogue's brain, tormenting her and lashing out at her. And to some people that was a very literal thing, where like, yeah, you absorbed me, now I'm here and yelling at you while I lie comatose. And other people thought, and this is much more realistic, but again, it's comic book land, so it can be kooky, it can be nuts, that those fake memories, and probably Carol Danvers' last thoughts before going into a coma, were all combining to drive Rogue mad and to believe that she was hearing voices that told her she was a bad person, that she could never be forgiven, stuff like that. And apparently they're making minor changes. Again, this is all speculation, but they're going to set it up so that Rogue gets her extra powers that she got in the comics from absorbing Captain Marvel, but that Captain Marvel won't be hobbled, that her introduction in the form of this feature film and in Avengers Endgame won't be immediately followed by taking her off the table entirely, putting her back in a coma. That's not going to happen. But there will be a battle of sorts of epic proportions between Captain Marvel and Rogue, and it will leave Rogue with greater power. And it'll possibly take some of the power away from Captain Marvel, which may not be a bad thing. Because the one thing that people are complaining about in the trailer, and what does look to be the case, is that she's so powerful. And look, it can already be assumed that her existence is going to be a linchpin in the undermining of Thanos and the resurrection of half the Marvel Universe. That's quite a debut. She'll also fight the entire Kree-Skrull War and possibly the storyline of Secret Invasion in her own movie. So she's going to be introduced with a power set that is unprecedented in film. She's going to be like 10 times more powerful than Superman if the trailer's to be believed. Combining that with an origin story that is not great, one that involves messing with time. It's a sloppy, this too is speculation, but based on everything I've heard, based on everything I've seen in the trailers, based on everything everyone has said about this movie, including the people who are just lavishing praise upon it, make it seem like her origin's a little bit... It almost undermines the character to be so absurdly powerful, to be able to take out all the Avengers herself if she wants, despite having been the product of, allegedly, the creation, the last-minute off-screen creation of an alternate timeline by one or more of the Marvel heroes. That's going to stretch the boundaries of disbelief, and that is going to set up a genuinely, just as the world in real life is actually getting darker, and people are getting more cynical, and Marvel movies have been dominating our box office here in America and overseas for over a decade now. It is very easy to see superhero fatigue setting in, and that the introduction of essentially a god conjured out of nothing could be an inflection point in which the genre, which was once widely mocked, considered ridiculous, that has now since become the highest grossing, most reliable box office hits on the planet, that fulcrum could swing back the other way. And all it would take would be the right inciting incident. And it would be awful if these neck-bearded weirdos concocting weird stories and paranoia fantasies about Brie Larson, if they won. And again, all this could be cured. People's crazy ideas of making movies where the risk potential is much greater than the potential reward, where an empire that's been recently built could be at risk just because you got that out of touch and that disinterested in your entire fan base. Not white men, but everyone who sees your films and is let down by a haphazard origin and a hero who's so all-powerful that it's kind of goofy. What I'm saying is that after making that incredible debut in what looks like a great movie, and then following it up with an awesome performance, I am assuming, in Avengers Endgame, that you would then want to say, all right, we can't have a series of movies in which this god with the power of 1 million heroes. There aren't enough villains in the world, even in our fictional Crazy Town universe. There's no challenge for her. She could knock out Galactus with one punch. She could drink the Watcher under the table. And so it would make sense to make her interesting, as Marvel heroes have always been. The reason that Marvel was such a huge hit when it was revitalized in the 60s under Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, Roy Thomas, and many others. The formula that they struck, the reason that these characters matter to us so much, that they resonate the way they do, even though most of them were created out of the fears of their time. Almost all of them are some kind of Cold War fear brought to life. with silly, sort of sweeping dialogue that at once was incredibly exciting, but doesn't necessarily hold up under scrutiny decades later, nor was it ever meant to. But the reason that those heroes are still part of our modern mythology, and will continue to be for decades to come, is because the creators knew that what was missing from comic heroes to make people take them seriously was a flaw or many flaws. Personality problems, powers that they couldn't control, powers that they couldn't rely on to be consistent for them. And by taking a significant, not nearly all, but by reducing Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, to just a badass superhero and not a ridiculous MacGuffin, that is actually a very smart thing to do. And it'll make both her character and that of Rogue very interesting. And it'll help introduce, because, what they need to do with the X-Men now in order to integrate them into the Marvel Universe is basically, I think, I certainly could be wrong. And part of me wants to be because I like some of the cast members very much. But I think they're going to do some kind of big sweeping change where it's like those 6 X-Men movies and the 2 that are almost certainly never going to be released, Dark Phoenix and New Mutants, forget about all that. We're in Marvel Town now. So we're going to meet them in Avengers versus X-Men, say, which would be a very smart thing to do. It would help carry forward this new generation of Avengers movies. It would be a clean slate, a fresh start for the X-Men, who, frankly, I want to just chalk it up to timing because they were among the very first superhero movie franchises. And as such, they were subject to a lot of scrutiny. Fox did not believe in the property, or they would occasionally believe in it, but then they would abandon ship periodically. And creatively, the series was very uneven. X-Men 3: The Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine are shockingly bad. X-Men 2 really doesn't hold up, and X-Men 3 was never good. Never had a chance. Still doesn't. And so it got so bad that they had to scrap the entire cast and go back in time for X-Men First Class, which was awesome. But then immediately they started pissing on that legacy with Apocalypse and Days of Future Past. This is awful, basically doing the same movie again and again and again, a little bit less enjoyable each time, a little bit more corny, a little bit more unbelievable, a bit more phoned in by a cast that nearly all of them clearly want out. They've been vocal about it in interviews. They show it in their performance. It's bad. And so having gone through 2 iterations, and with the departure of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, who was great, but it's time for a change. And I think that while I'm a little bit tired of complete reboots in comics, and I would not want to see that become a common occurrence in comic-based films, I think that it would be wise to say, listen, none of this happened. Go to sleep. Okay, now wake up, come see Avengers versus X-Men, and watch Captain Marvel be reduced to a mere Titanic superhero. And now things get interesting because there are higher stakes. There's greater conflict. And for instance, as Carol Danvers struggles with mortality, being kind of a human being, Rogue now will suffer tremendously for being an awful person, because it is an awful thing to do to sneak up on somebody and do that, and wrestle with these new powers she has, powers which will make her more formidable and more interesting, as will the torment she suffers and the guilt she endures. So, having started this entire show off condemning conspiracies and leaping to judgment, I now find that I've done a little bit of that myself, but listen, at least I've made it clear, right? That this is all idle speculation. I hope so anyway. I don't want to in any way have anything in common with any of this bizarre pro or con Captain Marvel contingent. I believe that a happy medium exists where people can go to see movies and enjoy them and not believe that there's this weird, I don't even know how to describe how stupid these people's theory is about Brie Larson, but it's silly and wrong and dumb. And similarly, I'm sorry, but I very much doubt that every single reviewer really left the theater with their lives profoundly changed. I'll grant you, I haven't seen the movie, but this is a little bit silly. Come on, everybody. Let's all just pretend to be sane for a little while. Anyway, get in touch with the Matt Sager podcast. I would love to hear from you. You can email me, matt@mattsager.com, or call 646-535-4788. Also, check the links in the description for tonight's podcast. You'll find links to my Patreon, patreon.com/mattsager, and my merch store from wehavemerch.com. They're great people, and they've got Matt Sager podcast logo t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and stickers. You can also find me on social media, where on Twitter, I'm at Matt Sager. On Facebook, I've got a personal page, The Matt Sager, a page highlighting my voiceover work, Matt Sager VL, and a page for this podcast, Matt Sager Podcast. As for everything else, articles, blog posts, my voiceover reels and contact info, and even archived back episodes of this podcast, you can find all of that on my website, mattsagervoiceover.com.